Such a lovely sunny afternoon. I'm reading out of Return to Elysium. This is chapter 13. It's a life of Joan Grant. She is Lucina here, 2nd century BC. She's escaped Rome with Nigellus. 13. Stone Apollo. To avoid passing along roads where Nigellus might be recognized, we sailed down the coast until we reached a small port where we could take passage on a trading ship, which would land us at Ancona. Again, Euripides made a needless complication, or did he really consider it a wise precaution? He told the shipmaster that Nigellus was my uncle. Fortunately, the accommodation was so limited that we had to share a cabin. Euripides was travelling to Umbria by land and would have left for Athens before we reached the villa. The night before he left, he again asked me whether I was sure I would not prefer to go back to Greece with him. "It's never too late to change your mind," he said. "We've always been able to laugh together. Are you sure you won't come with me? We never have to pretend with each other. Even when we play an unfair trick, we can always see the joke." He sounded forlorn, as though for a moment he had lost his self-confidence. Did Euripides need me more than Nigellus? I hesitated. Elysium seemed very close, compellingly urgent. Then I saw Nigellus coming along the quay, followed by a boy carrying an enormous bunch of flowers, another with a basket of fruit, a third staggering under a load of parcels, presents for me, presents I did not want, but how could I betray him? "I go to Umbria," I said. Euripides shrugged his shoulders. "I will come to stay with the matron, if she is still interested in news of the world. Please understand, I'm not just being stubborn." And then I could say no more, for Nigellus had joined us, and he must never know how difficult it was for me to say goodbye to Greece. The winds were contrary, and it took us nearly a month to reach Ancona. Nigellus tried to keep me amused, but he thought it odd of me to enjoy talking with the sailors, and was annoyed when I asked permission to steer. At the little ports we visited, I insisted on eating in the small taverns and wandering through the markets. I had to make myself forget our early days in Rome, for even Narcissus had never found it difficult to talk as an equal with ordinary people. Nigellus had often described himself as the spokesman of the plebeians. Reluctantly I learned that this only meant that, when he made a speech, they could provide the audience. I frequently reminded myself that it was impossible for him to find my way of living easy. It would take time to cure him of the infection of Julia. Euripides had installed 4 servants in the villa, and there was the steward, Caius, and his wife, Sempronia, who did the cooking. I was glad they were all free, for it saved me having to discuss the awkward question of slaves. The house was rather small, and the heating system inadequate by Roman standards. Nigellus was soon engrossed in plans for improvements, eager as a child playing with bricks. He left the garden design to me. I soon had several masons building new retaining walls, for the ground sloped steeply down to a valley and was sheltered from the north by the ilex grove. I changed the course of a mountain stream so that it fell in a series of waterfalls into a narrow pool. Nigellus wanted this to be tiled with mosaics and used as a swimming bath, but I insisted on keeping it as a future retreat, when it would be concealed by flowering thickets and the harsh new marble covered with deep moss. We agreed that there should be a vine pergola on the south terrace, but I refused to accept formal beds planted with marigolds, for they reminded me of Julia. He was also a trifle difficult about statues, and bought me several which would have made Praxiteles laugh. The worst were a Juno who looked as though she would melt in the sun, and a Mars which might have been the portrait of an overfed centurion. In the barn of the farm, which Nigellus added to the property, I found an ancient statue of Apollo. It had obviously been brought from Greece, but I could discover nothing of its history except that it had been dug up in the ilex grove. Nigellus was disappointed that I wanted it, for I had dismissed his presence on the plea of an illogical dislike of statuary. So I told him I only liked it because I thought it suitable for us to make a daily votive offering to Apollo. He was always delighted to indulge me, providing I pretended it was a feminine whim instead of a conflict of taste or a logical deduction. How easy and yet how difficult I found it to be a female. I was happy when he made love to me, which he did whenever I gave him the opportunity. I enjoyed seeing my house grow, so long as I could make myself believe that each detail or fresco or mosaic was of real importance. Toilet became a ritual, clothes a horizon, perfume an incense, when I could remember that it was more necessary to be beautiful than to be wise. In 1,000 ways Nigellus showed that he was content with his return to youth. I had only to wear a new dress for him to start designing a jewel to be its complement. Even the flowers I grew he saw as a wreath for me to wear or colour for my rooms. He was always busy, first with the house, then with the farm, then with breeding cows and oxen, which apparently must have pedigrees impeccable as his own. But what was I supposed to do? How did other matrons occupy their long hours of day? I tried to superintend the household, but Sempronia was more than competent. I searched for dust, but it had always been removed before I got up in the morning. Why should I scrutinize the tallies when Nigellus enjoyed doing it, and I knew Chios was honest? What did other couples talk about when one day was like another, as links in a chain? I listened with convincing attention to stories of earlier triumphs of Nigellus. I acquired a mass of useless knowledge of Roman law, senatorial procedure, Roman victories. We did not discuss philosophy, for he found it too insubstantial, and I discovered that anything which reminded me too sharply of Elysium was best avoided. Then I knew I was going to have a child. I lost the sense of futility, which I suddenly realized had been making me intolerant. I discovered that a pregnant woman acquires a kind of animal contentment. Her thoughts flow in rhythm with the seasons. The world narrows and seems honest as bread. I no longer wished to acquire still more gardeners. I wanted to feel the earth under my hands, to plant small green shoots and watch them grow under my protection. Nigellus became even more tender, and my every wish was satisfied almost before I had time to express it. Julia must have resented childbearing, for I learned, though she was never mentioned directly, that she had produced every symptom of the rebellious womb: sickness, vertigo, and an extraordinary demand for unseasonable foods. Nigellus was at first proud that I remained healthy, and then began to worry lest I was hiding discomfort, because I was too proud to admit it. Or did he think that I ought to have produced a patrician protest against such a commonplace experience? I'll make this in 2 parts and finish this. So far,